Do you think twerking is dirty? Hype's six-member girl group Sserafim, active since 2022, released their single Smart under their Easy EP. Since its release, the song has been at the center of ongoing debates about K-pop's appropriation of Black culture, specifically in its dance and music. So, to discuss the soundtrack of Smart, the song pulls predominantly from two genres, Afrobeats and Amapiano. So Afrobeats originated in West Africa, particularly Nigeria and Ghana, drawing from High Life, Juju, and Fela Kuti's Afrobeat. It fuses Western genres like hip-hop, R&B, and dancehall with traditional African rhythms, and it tends to be energetic and upbeat with prominent percussion, catchy melodies, and lyrics that often celebrate African life or romance. So you could kind of think of musicians such as Burna Boy, Wizkid, and Rema, among others. As for Amapiano, it emerged from South Africa's townships in the mid-2010s. Part of the house music lineage, it borrows from Kwaito and jazz, and has deep, soulful beats and jazzy piano riffs. And it's generally much slower and moodier than Afrobeats, with deep bass lines, log drums, which is its signature percussive element, and extended atmospheric instrumentals. So you could kind of think of artists such as Tyla or Capza Small. We could get into these rhythms another day. Right now, let's focus on the movement, specifically Tyla's Water, which was released in 2023, versus Sserafim's Smart, which was released in 2024. Why is this such a big problem? Smart's chorus choreography, set to repeat the word smarter, was quickly called out for resembling Tyla's famed Bacardi routine from Water.
Make me sweat, make me harder, make me lose my breath, make me sweat. Me, 신경 써, 쉬. 그렇게 바로 me. 나게 보여, see. Smarter, baby, smarter, baby, smarter.
Following accusations of copying and even plagiarism, the group faced criticism for its Afrobeats-inspired movements, which many labeled as twerking. A more accurate read is that they're performing variations of the Bacardi dance, but before unpacking why that distinction matters, here's the difference between the two. So both dances feature prominent buttock shaking and hip thrusts, but twerking is defined by lower squatting stances and rhythmic muscle isolation, with shaking, popping, and bouncing the hips from a bent knee position without much intricate leg work. Bacardi, by contrast, originates from South Africa and requires an upright posture with the chest out, pairing lower body movement with intricate, energetic leg work and a lighter, much more bouncier step. And according to YouTuber and dance lifestyle creator Rose Basemera, Bacardi is usually performed to Amapiano music and is sometimes called the tamer version of twerking for its class and grace. And despite this distinction, general audiences tend to conflate the two, and usually not favorably, because commenters called the Smart choreography inappropriate for such young performers. The younger member was 17 when the song came out, framing it as girls twerking for everyone to see. So why does a dance move that's just shaking the booty suddenly become icky and inappropriate? The answer starts with how disconnected these movements have become from their history. To many people who've only encountered these movements through Eurocentric social media and pop culture, twerking reads as nothing more than shaking your booty, stripped of meaning and history. The Oxford English Dictionary defines it as a sexually provocative dance using thrusting movements, and even reduces it to a twitch. But twerking is a shared cultural evolution rooted in West Africa, not the invention of any single person. It traces back to dances like Mabuka in Côte d'Ivoire, originally practiced at community events and symbolic celebration. These customs crossed the Atlantic through the transatlantic slave trade, merging with local influences to help shape modern dance forms across the southern United States and the Caribbean. According to UCLA African American Studies professor Dr. Cheryl Keyes, music and dance in African culture were tied to life cycle rites, birth, death, ancestral commemoration, the installation of new leadership, etc. And so music was not a separate entertainment category. It was woven into everyday communal life, a quality that carried into the African American tradition and under slavery became a survival mechanism. He also notes that in most West and Central African indigenous languages, there's often no word for music distinct from movement or dance. The two are conceptually inseparable. So when this piece talks about music, it's talking about dance too. And the inseparability is part of why the movements were so easily miscast by outsiders. Since the 16th century, at the start of the transatlantic slave trade, European travelers, missionaries, and traders consistently described African and African-derived sound as wild, crude, strange, or simply noise. Dutch trader William Bosman, writing from the Guinea coast in the 1600s, is a direct source for this framing. He criticized hand-played drums, as opposed to stick-played ones, as dismal and horrid. The counter-framework comes from Cameroonian composer Francis Bebe, who argued that African music's objective, quote, is not necessarily to produce sounds agreeable to the ear, but to translate everyday experiences into living sound, making conventional beauty an irrelevant criterion. This underlies what composer Ollie Wilson called the heterogeneous sound idea, which is an intentional aesthetic preference for varied, buzzing, mixed timbres over a single pure tone. It's also the through line to instruments talking. Because many West and Central African languages are tonal, instruments like talking drums and talking trumpets could function as speech surrogates. That practice carried directly into African American musical tradition, where musicians make instruments talk using mutes, bottlenecks, slides, Leslie speakers, fuzz boxes, and altered embouchure or fingering. Dance functioned in the same way as a form of speech, especially in eras when African peoples and their culture were oppressed, violated, and erased. For example, the Enlightenment era, the scramble for Africa, the transatlantic slave trade, Jim Crow, and even the present day where white supremacy still shapes everyday underlying social, political, economic, and spiritual structures. In this way, cultural expression across literature, art, music, and dance all became a way to counter racism and disenfranchisement. As writer and philosopher Alan Locke put it, quote, art must discover and reveal the beauty which prejudice and caricature have overlaid. So recurring themes throughout this history include racial and cultural rejuvenation, racial frustration, collective tragic destiny, protest, and even radicalism. One historical episode captures the irony of Eurocentric pop culture borrowing African dance for aesthetics and profit, Dancing the Slaves. As Maltby describes it, enslaved Africans arriving in the 17th century brought cultural traditions such as language, religion, folklore, music, and dance that were entirely foreign to European traders and slaveholders. Slave ship captains actively facilitated the transmission of these traditions during the Middle Passage, bringing African instruments like drums and the banjar, an early banjo, aboard and forcing enslaved people to play and dance at gunpoint. This wasn't a form of generosity in terms of culture. It was basically a method to prevent illness like scurvy and combat suicidal despair, keeping cargo profitable before reaching port, and the cargo being these slaves. And these forced performances contributed to demeaning portrayals of Africans, even as they doubled as a survival mechanism amid other forms of contextual resistance, including suicide aboard the ships. And beyond rewriting the meaning of these dances, there's a separate problem of miscrediting them entirely. At the 2013 VMAs, Miley Cyrus's twerking heavy performance was framed as reinvention, not appropriation.
Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy.
with some online even crediting her as having invented the move. That framing makes clear how Western pop stars profit by commercializing a movement while leaving out its African origins entirely. Cyrus herself later associated the performance with vulgarity and superficiality, acknowledging it was partly a vehicle for escaping her good girl Disney image. She wanted to seem ratchet, wild, and grown, borrowing from black club and dance culture to redefine herself. And Le Sserafim's case fits the same pattern. Their use of Bacardi in Smart reflects a similar dynamic, just at the company level, because it was Hype's strategy all along to expand K-pop's global reach. In a 2023 CNN interview, which is just 1 year before the song was released, Hype chair Bang Si-hyuk said K-pop's global footprint was much smaller than people assume, and that the rise of genres like Latin music and Afrobeats made international expansion urgent. So before making a final call on Smart, here's the framework I'm using. This is my own appropriation score, which entails historical knowledge, credit and attribution, performance context, benefit and profit, community impact, and relationship. So by these criteria, Le Sserafim and Hype's use of Bacardi alongside the Afrobeats and Amapiano influences reads as cultural appropriation. The song not only caused widespread misinterpretation of twerking and Bacardi movements alike, but it also reinforced existing misconceptions about those movements. It offered no cultural or historical context, which mirrors a broader pattern of colonial exploitation narratives, and finally the group and company are profiting in visibility and money from the borrowed movement.
My name is Carlos Alviar. I've been dancing since 2023 in August, but more freestyle during 2024. I'd say I'm more of a street dancer, but also I really like to freestyle.
Would you characterize Le Sserafim's Smarter as cultural appropriation?
I think so. That's not to discredit them. They're 100% talented. I also understand that it's not entirely their choice. Smarter is 100% a good dance. But then, given context to everything they've done before and after, a lot gets lost when people only focus on the surface level technique. The timing of it all. When Le Sserafim dropped Smarter, that's when Tyla started to really blow up. That's when Afro beats and that's when Afro dance step movements really started to blow up, especially in the TikTok dance scene. TikTok dance scene in music and just in the internet in general, people are starting to really look at it more. And that really kind of invites a lot of culture vultures where they see something trending. It's okay, if we repeat this, people will look at it because it's really enticing right now. But let's look at what Le Sserafim released afterwards. They've actually moved quite quickly into Vogue techno only because it was really trendy at the time, and it really just feels like they use the trend of Afrobeats as a means of their own goals instead of honoring what Afrobeats really means to a community. And when people see groups like Le Sserafim and other groups do these styles and kind of move on with the trend instead of actually honoring what they're doing, it really comes off as insensitive.
To reflect on this case study, representation without understanding for sure becomes misrepresentation. When culture, something that ties people back to their roots, is consumed like content, it often gets erased, and it belongs to the people who lived it, not to those who choreographed and performed it for a viral song for views and profit. And stripping these movements from their meaning disregards the complexity and the richness of the community's history. And none of this makes these responses oversensitive, because they come from real histories of marginalization and erasure. And true appreciation means collaboration and thoughtful participation, giving credit and visibility to the source. That said, the line between appreciation, appropriation, and syncretism depends on power, history, and intent. Call-out culture can flatten nuance, so we shouldn't slap the appropriation label on a practice without weighing the artist's intent, impact, and everything in between. That is why there's so much to consider in deciding whether this song appropriates Black culture. So ultimately, this episode and the one still to come isn't about calling artists out, but it's about understanding how cultural appropriation actually happens and why some people hold really strong opinions about it while others engage with these movements without a second thought. Thank you so much for tuning in on this pretty long episode, and I'll meet you guys in our next one. Thank you.